Welcome to Born to Speak to You TV, where we speak life into the moments that matter. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs Jr., and tonight we're tackling a powerful question. What happened to our First Amendment, and why are so many everyday people afraid to use it? The First Amendment gives every American the right to freedom of religion. It gives them the right to free speech. It gives them the right to freedom of the press, I should say. And it also gives them the right to assemble wherever they want to. And lastly, it gives them the right to petition the government. But lately, it seems that freedom has a price. People are being canceled for what they say online. Students are being disciplined for speaking their beliefs. Journalists face pressures to soften the truth. Even workplaces quietly tell the employees to keep their opinions to themselves. So, is the First Amendment only for some people, or have we forgotten what it truly means to have a voice? Stay tuned, because tonight we'll talk with community leaders and advocates who believe that the First Amendment belongs to everyone, not just those in power. This is Born to Speak to You TV. We'll be right back.
Of Brooklyn, where stories grow wild, to the glow of the stage where the dream meets the child. A quiet flame, a hidden spark, drawn to the words that lit up the dark. Curtains rose and so did he, finding power in poetry. One voice, one mic, one sacred truth. Every word he spoke uncaged the youth. He saw the world try to silence the bold, but his soul was wired to break the mold.
And we are back. This is Born to Speak to You TV. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs. And tonight we're talking about the First Amendment and the forgotten power that we have as citizens of this country. I want to read something to you. And it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Those 45 words are the First Amendment, and they guarantee 5 fundamental freedoms. Freedom of religion. Congress cannot establish a national religion or prevent people from practicing their own religion. And then there is freedom of speech. People can express their opinions without government censorship. That's our right. Freedom of the press. The media can report and criticize the government without censorship. I'm going to say that one more time because somebody probably needs to hear that. The media can report and criticize the government without censorship. Freedom to assemble. That means people can gather together peacefully. Whenever they want to, wherever they want to, people can gather together peacefully. And then the right to petition. People can ask the government to address their grievances. So the First Amendment protects those 5 fundamental freedoms. It was adopted in 1791 And as part of the Bill of Rights, it prevents Congress from making laws that establish a national religion, prohibit the freedom of religion, abridge freedom of speech or the press, or interfere with the rights of people to peacefully assemble or petition the government. But it seems these days that the government wants us be quiet, to be quiet. And how can we be quiet when here at Born to Speak to You, we are born to speak to you, and we're born to speak life into the moments that matter? More and more, we're seeing these 5 fundamental foundational rights being stomped on, being disregarded in this country. And a lot of times, we, the people, are not using these powers. It's as if we have forgotten that we have these rights. And that is dangerous, because if we forget that we have these rights and we don't use these rights, who knows where we're going to end up. So tonight, we are going to talk to some guests. I have 2 guests that's waiting to come on, and we're going to discuss some fundamental reasons why things are happening like this in this country right now. This is Born to Speak to You TV. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs, and we'll be right back after this short message. Hi, this is Calvin Gibbs with Born to Speak to You TV, and here's your Born to Rise tip for today. You're not stuck. You're just committed to certain patterns of behavior that in the past may have worked for you. But guess what? You've grown past those patterns of behavior. Now they're more harmful than they are helpful. And the reason that you can't move forward is because you keep applying an old formula to a new level in your life. That old formula, that is for where you were. But you've moved on to another level. And it's time to have a new formula, a new solution. So change the formula and get a different result. If you keep doing what you did when you were there, it's not going to work out. You've moved on to another level. Change the formula and step into your purpose. You were born to rise.
From the streets of Brooklyn, where stories grow wild, to the glow of the stage where the dream meets the child. A quiet flame, a hidden spark, drawn to the words that lit up the dark.
And we are back. This is Born to Speak to You TV. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs, and today my guests are Father Larry Dowling he's a former pastor at a church in Chicago. And we have Marsette Mangum, who is an activist. And thank you, gentlemen, for being on the show. So let's jump right into it. To start things off, how would you describe the original intent of the First Amendment? What rights it protects and why those rights are considered to be foundational? And I'll ask that question to Father Larry.
So the original intent was, obviously freedom of speech, freedom, of religion, freedom to gather, assembly, freedom of the press, and freedom to bring grievances to the government. It was meant for all. Obviously, early on, there were limits on that as to who was included in that. Obviously, because of the enslavement of people and the status, particularly of African Americans, and the status of women. So there were limits even in the beginning on all of those things as to who could assemble and, who had the freedom. Freedom of religion was core, and people will say that is one of the founding principles of the country. It is one of them. There are others that, really formed this country, and one of those is, again, the enslavement of peoples. That this country was founded on as well. But in the midst of it all, the original intent was to include all, and eventually, I think, to include everyone.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So it was foundational with limitations.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Marsette, looking at the Trump administration, what are the most significant actions that you believe have threatened and chilled free speech for just the everyday people, not the high-profile media outlets, just the everyday people that now are afraid to speak up?
Well, I think that what they've done is shown that we can come after you and that there is a consequence to free speech. I agree with Father Larry that it has always been conditional. There's always been groups who were not included in that. And I think that's one of the fundamental parts that we have to understand as a people. We like to have this pie in the sky view of the founding fathers, and not so much even the founding fathers, but the situation that this country was founded in, that everyone was to come here and find their way. And in some cases that is true, but there have always been groups of people that have always been excluded in that. And that group floats from time to time. Sometimes, it's been situational, fundamentally Black people, fundamentally women, and fundamentally some poor white men. And until we understand that there are always groups that have been locked out of this, and I've said for some time, there's never been a free and fair election. If you think about it, there's always been a group that has been locked out of the electoral process or systematically kind of squished out of the process, that we will use, like saying, oh, well, I don't not like Father Larry. I just don't particularly like guys with white collars. Mm-hmm. So there've always been some way that they've used to kind of do, but try to say that they're not doing it. And with this current administration, what they're doing and what I find so insidious, they've gone after the big guys first to kind of set the example. So if you're looking at this, you're saying, well, I'm not $1 million news conglomerate. I don't have $1 billion to fight this. So they've gone after these guys and they've capitulated. So now they're coming after the little people. They don't want any type of criticism of their administration whatsoever. And the understanding is that has always supposed to have been one of the fundamental pillars of this society. And they have played no games and made no secret that they're going against that.
Okay.
I would echo that as well. I think across the spectrum of the rights under the First Amendment, I think there's been, clearly limitations and a shrinking number of people that they are even, saying it's okay to speak out, or to be able to, even if you take each one, even like freedom of religion. Let's just take one of them. Freedom of religion, the attacks on universities over, anti-Semitic dialogue or anti-Semitic, protests. Many Jewish leaders will say they're using that as a way to control universities and limit free speech at universities. It's not about anti-Semitism. It's about a way to go after universities to control what they teach at the universities. And that's been very clear. Early on, that's what I saw. It's like they're using that issue. They're not talking about, Palestinian rights. They're not talking about Palestinian free speech. There's that, and the other thing around freedom of religion is the whole sense of, this white Christian Catholic nationalism that is, has pervaded things. So even looking at, the President's Commission on Religious Liberty, it's Christians and Jewish, and there are no Muslims on the committee. So obviously there's clearly an exclusion there, and their main focus is on Christianity. And so, and again, some, number of the members on that commission have said very blatant anti-Muslim things, in some of their statements. So again, there's this limitation on, what faith tradition or what aspects of faith are, are acceptable and what are not. And so, from a pastor's point of view, from a Christian point of view, they're definitely not following the full teachings of Jesus Christ, or I think of any other faith tradition.
Okay. Well, I hear both you guys, and so my next question is: do we actually have a cultural problem more than a constitutional problem? I've been thinking about this one.
I think it's a good. Yeah. Go ahead. No, I think it's a good question. I've thought about that myself because I do think, in general, the American people don't know the basics of the Constitution, don't know the basics of the freedoms under the Bill of Rights, and are seeing some of this stuff as okay. And I'm seeing this in Facebook posts and that kind of stuff, that there's, again, that it's okay to limit certain people and this, this sense of divisiveness and all of that is being sown. Of course, all the most violent people are on the right, or the most violent people are on the left, and all this kind of stuff, that gets played out along the way. So so yes, I think in general, the American public does not know the Constitution. I mean, not only to mention, I don't think our president knows the Constitution. I'm not sure he's ever read the Constitution. So that's part of it as well.
And the way things are going, probably more people will not get to know it as they strive to make changes to it, or just rewrite it or eliminate it entirely. Mm-hmm. So, Marsette, I want to ask you a question about schools and workplaces. Should they do more to teach constructive dialogue rather than fear of expression? Should that be something that, I shouldn't say mandated in the schools, but can the schools help this situation by letting those under their tutelage know that you can speak, you have the right to do this? What's your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, I think one of the ironies with that is that the schools that have usually been the harbinger of free thought and dialect have been attacked. Those are one of the first institutions that this administration attacked. And a lot of them have also folded, unfortunately, rather. Schools like Harvard and a few others who have huge endowments and are able to kind of insulate themselves a little bit better than some other schools, because what happens, they figured out that the presidency in politics kind of has its tentacles literally in everything else, and they can control your funding or lack thereof, or what grants you get, or being able to pull grants. So they have said, hey, these breeding grounds for free thought and thinking, we're going to attack those first, and we're going to make sure that they are being publicly punished, to show that we are not allowing you guys to sit and set up think tanks or set up the next future leaders that are able to kind of think and bring our situation out of this. And what has happened simultaneously, if you've noticed for the last couple of years, we have, and I hate to say this term because I'm not calling anyone dumb, but we have seen a systematic dumbing down of the American populace, where before, when certain groups of people were the only ones getting college degrees, education was touted highly. Now that women and brown people and other people are coming in, other immigrant groups are coming in and going to college and fulfilling their educational dream, now all of a sudden education isn't so important. And again, the other irony is that this is being done by populists who are cosplaying as populists, actually, who most of them have Ivy League degrees. So they're saying, I got an Ivy League degree, but I'm going to pretend to be a person of the people to tell you that it's okay to not go get an education. And we're also hand in hand enacting policy that we're making college out of the reach of most average working people. We're we're not allowing for the cancellation of a lot of crippling student debt. And we're also going to say that you have to make these colleges kind of form to this new curriculum that they're trying to put together on the fly. So all of these things put together are showing a systematic disdain, or manufactured disdain, I'll say, because these people understood the value of getting an education, and they have Ivy League educations. So that allowed them to be able to go into politics and go into all these other things. But education for me, but not for thee, has become the order of the day.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yep.
I have a quote for you from Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, and it says, "The principle of free thought is not free thought for those who agree with us, but freedom for the thought that we hate." That's a very deep concept right there. And I think it kind of captures everything that is going on. So I will ask the next question. We know that schools are being penalized, funds are being held from them, and they try to take it to the courts. It seems that this administration has the courts wrapped up, or is willing to play the long game, right, and go through litigation for years or whatever. As far as the immediate everyday man or person, what rights do they have at this point to defend themselves? I mean, to get a high-powered lawyer is going to take money, and most don't have that to afford. How do you get covered? How do you make sure that your voice is heard, you're not retaliated against, and you can move forward? What is the next step that we can look forward to?
For me, I think, and we see this in the No Kings rallies and all that, and, but I think in a lot of ways, it's like, for one person to bring forward a grievance, it's easy to shut them down. And obviously you can't hire a lawyer. But if you can find a collective group of people and start organizing at a grassroots level to bring those grievances, it's hard to discount that by the people in power. And that's the power of community organizing. So if there's ways that we can draw people together to say, okay, we need to act, we need to find a way to collectively act. And in collectively acting, we can together, bring the resources we need to put pressure on those people in power to make a difference. I think it's that organizing piece that is key. It takes relationship building, which I think gets back to schools and in communities. How do you teach respectful dialogue? How do you talk about restorative practices rather than punitive practices that this administration is that it thrives on? Is just punitive. Everything is punishment of critics and whatever along the way. How do we engage people at a community level, at a grassroots level, in real dialogue to come together and organize as a collective body to stand up against these forces? There's a study, there's actually a sociological study that said, in a situation like this where we're at in the United States, it would take about 4% of the population to really organize to stop this trend. I mean, only 4%. I mean, it's a lot of people, but it's a small percentage of 100%, right? And so what does that take and what does that look like? And I think it's using that imagination. You're right. I mean, Marsette and Calvin, it's like, we are stuck with mediocrity, and this lack of education. We have people surrounding Trump who are mediocre, at best. And mediocrity seems to be the norm, and that's what they want. They want people that control the project, 20, 25 people who are, pulling the strings behind Trump and everybody else that's exactly who they want and they can control. And so that mediocrity, we've got to shift somehow and start raising up the excellence in our communities and bringing people together around that. The strictures on universities, yes, I mean, I think there's limitations there. So how do we be creative about bringing students together outside the university, venue, who want to come together and start talking about these things and organizing and those sorts of things. So, I mean, I look at the history of the African American community and the limits on schools and education, along throughout the history, and the African American community was incredibly creative in finding ways to do that. There's some just wonderful imagination so that young Black children could get an education when it was against the law to do so. And I think we need to take those we need to learn those lessons from the Black community, from history. Is how do we find and imagine creative ways to engage, and it can be outside. There's nothing that prevents us, at least at this point, from assembling outside the university structure, still bringing students together and faculty and having these conversations.
Yeah, and I like what you said about. Seems to be so much lackadaisicalness, mediocrity from the people. I talk to people all the time. I even strike up conversations at the local supermarket now, and a lot of people are willing to talk about it. They don't like what's going on, this, that, and the other, but they're not willing to get involved. They're not willing to do the grassroots organization. I recently met with some students that were on a coffee break from Joliet Junior College. And I thought it was a great opportunity to just talk to them, pick their minds, and see where they were at. And I left that conversation very disappointed. Very disappointed. I think in the past we've looked to college students to be a big part of the force of change, and I don't see that much help coming in from that direction anymore, or at least not now. So our next question is for you, Marsette. Many non-citizens or foreign students and activists claim that they're being penalized for speech critical of the U.S. or allied policy. Don't forget that it's not just the U.S., but anybody that's associated with the U.S. at this point. For example, violations of free speech rights for non-citizens were found in recent litigation. So how does the First Amendment apply or fail to apply for them? And how is the administration's policy consistent with constitutional norms? Should everybody be covered, or just citizens and forget about the non-citizens?
Well, I think that what this, again, these folks have had the better part of 6, 7, 8 years to kind of perfect the things that they couldn't do the last time. And that was my fear of people like us. They didn't go, and he played golf, but that, outside of playing golf and, meeting and hobnobbing with the guys in the Heritage Foundation and putting this plan together, they were working to perfect the things that they did not get right the last time. So this time they formed the fascist Voltron. I don't know if I can say that word on the channel, or if not, I guess we can pull that out. But being able to do that, they understood that they had to first continue the concept of othering. So whether it's women, or whether it's Black people, or whether now the other group, even though me and my buddies are the ones that have moved our jobs overseas for cheap labor, we're going to say it was those workers that are getting less than you. So they were effectively able to other these people. And by doing that, you are automatically subconsciously denying their humanity. And to my understanding, the ideal of being here in America is once you're in America, on American soil, whether you are a citizen or whether you are someone visiting or whether you are an alien, and I don't like using that term, but whether you're here from another country, we'll say, there's supposed to be certain inalienable rights. You're supposed to have due process. You're supposed to be able to redress grievance and all of the things that you mentioned earlier when you itemized the First Amendment. But now, by othering these people and making them the source of the problem, you have a whole swath of people who are not caring and being taught not to care that these things are happening to them, not thinking that 5 minutes later, once we get them out of the way, they're going to come for the next group. And that's what we see that continues to happen. And it was okay. And everything that's happening right now has been happening in an undercurrent to somebody, some group. Now, the outrage is that the people who helped march it in are now being affected. So, a lot of people who are, mad at work, their own, I mean, what kind of propaganda do you have to be taking in to say, hey, I'm going to vote out my own low-wage workers and literally cripple my own farming industry? But you find that these guys have put lots of time and lots of money into this othering concept so that you are not looking at them as human. Not only are you not looking at them as human beings, you're not even thinking if somehow something magical is going to happen. Like if you're standing on ice and you got a big circular saw and you're saying, hey, if you cut that, you're going to fall. Something will happen will save me. And this seems to be the thing. If we all watch the interviews of the dairy farmers and the crop growers and the soybean farm. Hey, well, aren't your workers part of this group that you're trying to get rid of? Yeah, but, and there was always some nebulous but that they could never explain, or somehow things were just going to work themselves out when their workers got canned or ran out of that state to escape being locked up. So now they're front and center with the consequences of that, and it's just now setting in. So we're going against a huge propaganda machine funneled by billionaires who want to continue getting cheap labor and who want to make sure that they are the only ones that are reaping the benefits of this American experiment.
Yep. We're going to take a little break, but I want to leave you with this thought before we come back. Growing up as a little boy, my ancestors came from North Carolina. They had little farms and did some sharecropping, things like that. And I always remembered my grandfather would say to me, and he was talking mainly about white people, but anybody that was above his level would fit into what he was saying. He said, people will cut off their arms if they think it's going to hurt you. Yeah. That's exactly what we're talking about, But we'll take a break right here, and this is a great conversation. We'll be right back. This is Born to Speak to You TV. We'll be back in 60 seconds. This is Calvin Gibbs with Born to Speak to You TV, and here's your Born to Rise tips. Sometimes the best things you can do is not think, not wonder, not imagine, don't obsess. Just breathe and have faith that everything will work out for the best. Oftentimes we make ourselves sick, worrying, obsessing, having anxiety about what's going to be. Just have faith that everything is going to come out okay. And usually it does. The things that you're worrying about have no merit in your life. They're there to confuse you, to make you feel weak, to make you feel inadequate. So the best thing you can do is don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Don't wonder about it. Don't obsess over it. Just have faith that everything will work out for the best.
From the streets of Brooklyn, where stories grow wild, to the glow of the stage where the dream meets the child. A quiet flame, a hidden spark, drawn to the words that lit up the dark.
And we are back. This is Born to Speak to You TV. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs. My guests this evening are Father Larry Dowling and Marsette Mangum. Gentlemen, we've been having a great conversation about the First Amendment. I definitely appreciate your contributions, your thoughtfulness, but I want to move the conversation a little bit to the role of media organizations and reporters. What do they play in preserving the First Amendment in practice, and how does governmental pressure on media affect that role? Especially since I think it was last week, the person in charge of the military, the War Department, got together with all of the generals and also with the media and made the statements about, they had to sign off on certain requirements that they were being asked, and a lot of them got up and left, which I clap and give them kudos for doing that. But what role do media organizations and reporters play in preserving the First Amendment in practice? Should they just go along with what they're told, or soften or weaken the truth to get their stories out there, or should they have the faith, have the right practice of telling the truth? Father Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think again, the media at their best, act with integrity, do their best to tell the truth. That particular segment of journalism, I think, is shrinking to a large degree. When you've got particular news programs that are very conservative, ultra conservative, and thrive on that, and thrive on and are more about making news than about really reporting any sort of truth, then again, that's being controlled by advertisers. That's being controlled by all of those things. So how do you support journalism that are people of integrity, that people who want to explore and reveal the truth of what's happening? How is the press involved in putting enough pressure, which they've been great at in the past, on putting pressure on the government and other bodies, other people, individuals, and corporations, and the church as well, to enact change? And so I think it's again, that's the pressures on the media, I think, are really obviously intense right now. There are still groups that I think have great integrity in their reporting, and I do believe there are a multitude of journalists out there who want to adhere to that integrity and truth telling and all those sorts of things. Now, the overall institutions that are supporting them and all that may place limitations on that, and that's where I think the tension is. So, and then when you've got the government stepping in and threatening and doing all these crazy things to limit speech, again, that's a huge threat to any democracy. When you start attacking the media, when you start attacking journalists, that's again the path of Hitler and others who eventually were able to control everything that was being said by the media.
All right, and we've seen just recently, last month, where a late night talk show host was removed from his job for a period of time for going against this administration. And the outpouring of support was crazy. I mean, they were coming from all corners in support. And guess what? He got back on the air in a couple of days. That did not take very long. Wow. And that, I mean, that wasn't even a grassroots organization. That was just people going off and stating their opinions and doing it everywhere they could. And that change happened like that. So,
Well,
yes, Marsette, go ahead.
we can't leave out the fact that they spoke with their dollars too. So that corporation won several $1 million in subscriptions and sponsorships and that kind of thing. And so I think that that's one of the things that we also have to understand. We still have the power of the purse, and we, for so long we've allowed other entities to define who our enemy is. And and I heard Father Larry talk about the Heritage Foundation earlier. Calvin knows that I've been talking about these people and naming the names for some time now, but we allow them to have this big nebulous boogeyman, and the people who are actually responsible for these things can walk right past it and you'll never know who they are. So we've got to do a better job of naming the names and coming. I think now they're protesting outside the Heritage Foundation. And I've been saying for some time, all of the people that support, the people that support them and their sponsors, and that's the only thing that they understand at this point. So we've got to do, when it comes to media, there are good people still, they're good journalists, but what happened, they're a money-making entity, and the people that own, we've allowed ownership to be so consolidated to 2 or 3 people, and it's become a for-profit entity that it's all, and the advent of this 24-hour news cycle, it's a business, and getting out true journalism and truth has taken a second or third seat a lot of times. And I know I found myself and I found a lot of other people saying that after the election, the presidential election, they were so blown out that they could not go back and listen to their favorite channels again, because they realized some of the things that I'd been jumping up and down and screaming about and called crazy, that there was a spin even to the channels that we like. They're telling you that it's not that bad, or this person has a really good chance. So they're making it seem like at the core of America, they're more good and altruistic people than there are evil, self-centered people. And that may or may not be true, but what we've seen with our own eyes is that 72 million people looked at this candidate and said, yeah, I can get down with that. And that's a fundamental problem. And a lot of people were so caught off guard that it just completely had a disconnect and a shutdown. So what does that mean when our media is not saying, hey, you know what, there are a lot of people who think like this person? Because our default is that all of these people are always one-offs, or only like a small, rotten apple. Well, if half the barrel, we got to tell the truth, half the barrel's rotten, or we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be. If only 3 people thought that the civil rights movement was wrong, the history books would have been far different. If only 3 people thought that, what was going on in Germany in the 1930s and 40s was a bad thing, we wouldn't be here. So we've got to come to the terms that there are a lot of people who are either too scared or too smart to say that they feel the same way, but they go in those voting booths or they push for programs with their dollars or by voting that they feel that way. And so you can't fight an enemy if you're not fully abreast of what you're fighting. So I think
that's true.
Yeah, I would also throw in, I think the thing that I've noticed, and this because I have relatives downstate who do nothing but listen to Fox News and News Nation and all that. And as much as I tell them about the reality in Chicago, everything is about their experts are those news programs. Right. And so it's like, how does the press, or how do we get messaging that stories or whatever to get people thinking? And I think you're right, Marsette, that there's a general dumbing down of the population. and the administration is counting on that to stay in power. Uneducated people that are going to be, basically listening to the and being programmed by these different news entities, and not thinking for themselves. One of the questions that I ask people oftentimes when when people want to argue with me is like, okay, why do you believe this? And they'll refer to a news program that they watched, or we heard this on such and such, and then I ask them the question, and why do you want to believe that that's true? Why do you want to believe that these people are bad people, that immigrants are bad people? And typically there's no answer. Sometimes they'll say, well, I don't want to believe that. And I said, well, if you don't want to believe that, did you think about actually doing a little bit more research and talking to people that are actually affected by this? Because if you're allowing, certain news program, and this is the only news you're listening to form your opinion, then it's not your opinion. It is you're basically mimicking what you're being told. And so think for yourself.
Yep.
And think about, first of all, why do you believe it? And why do you want to believe it? Because I think there is an impulse in us to, again, this demonizing and all that. But to get people thinking about that and say, okay, and hopefully they will say, well, I don't want to believe that. But, some people, I think, buy into that demonization. But I think it's challenging people to say, okay, help me understand, why do you believe that? And what is it why do you want to believe that's true? And that often stops them in their path. And they just don't react, for one thing, or they may say, well, I don't want to believe that. And that's the kind of like, okay, then, why don't you do a little bit more research, because you might find out something different.
Yep. And that's why, Father Larry, I try to talk to as many people that don't look like me as possible, because that's part of the process, getting to know each other.
Right.
If you know other people and what they do, how they live, what their priorities are, you find out we have a lot more in common than we are different.
Right. Yep. The people in power want to keep us at this level, at the political level, the liberal, conservative level, the Democrat, Republican level, and we got to start connecting at the human level, and call people back to that.
Exactly. So, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you for anyone that wants to reach out to you, maybe to talk to you about organizing or getting involved, sharing resources, information. Father Larry, where can they reach you?
So they can reach me on my email at Dowling, DOWLING, at Chicago.org.
Okay, and that's scrolling on the bottom of the screen right now. And Marsette, same question for you.
Yes, they can reach me on Instagram at Marsette Mangum. It's my name, and they'll see my picture up there, and we can connect that way.
Fantastic. And real briefly, I'm going to ask each of you one question. If you could relay a message to people to speak life into the moments that matter, how would you tell them briefly to go about that? How would you tell them to speak life into the moments that matter? We have a lot of moments around us these days that matter, but how can we express to them to speak life into those moments? And let's say we start with Marsette this time.
I think that you guys raised a good point. I am I'm working on myself. I'm a work in progress, and I know that I'm a little bit more fiery. So I don't often get to engage to the level that I probably should with other people. Excuse me. I was trying to hold that. So I do agree, and I do still feel that at a basic level, we are more alike than we are different. And if we can find a common ground, it doesn't really matter if you call yourself a Republican and I call myself an independent or this, that, and the other. If we both want a $20 minimum wage, let's work toward that. You value your grandmother and she is invaluable to me. I valued my grandmother. She was invaluable to me. Let's talk about healthcare that is helpful for all, so people aren't dying because they can't afford overpriced medications that the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry are making untold billions on. Let's meet there.
Okay,
so
sounds good.
I think that that's the start.
Okay, sounds good. Father Larry, same question. How would you tell people to speak life into the moments that matter?
So there's two things that come to mind real quickly. I reject the labels of liberal and conservative, and and instead talk about, I think, more from a faith perspective. Can we agree on the things that we want to conserve? In terms of basic freedoms for everybody. Can we agree on the importance of family and community, and so are there areas we can, and then who needs liberation? And ultimately we all need liberation, but certain people need more in terms of the freedoms and the rights to the freedom. So I think it's just trying to put it in that context rather than get into the labels. But it's like let's talk seriously about what we feel strongly about. We want to conserve, and hopefully those are kind of in our founding principles and all those sorts of things. But also, who needs liberation? And in the eyes of God, we all need liberation, right?
Right.
The other thing I will just add is we've got to create, and I think and appreciate what you're doing, Calvin, in terms of reaching out to people and across racial boundaries and other boundaries, that those boundaries are set in place in our culture for a reason, and it's to keep us from talking to each other. And so it takes a deliberate effort to do that. I call it, when I talk to congregations, I call it taking risks for love. How do we take risks for love? Because to extend the love, and to see each other as human beings, all trying to, care for our families and support our communities and do all those sorts of things. And again, I think I've said throughout this conversation is, how do we come together and meet at a human divine level, human spirit level, and really, again, but it takes a purposeful, crossing those boundaries, and that takes some courage sometimes, and but it definitely takes an effort.
Absolutely. I want to thank Father Larry Dowling for being on the show this evening. Marsette Mangum, thank you so much for being on the show. This is Born to Speak to You TV. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. And we are back. This is Born to Speak to You TV. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs, and tonight's discussion reminds us that the First Amendment isn't just a line in the Constitution, it's a lifeline for democracy, but it only works if we all use it responsibly. It's the freedom to speak truth to power, to challenge what's wrong, to express what's right, and to build bridges where silence builds walls. So let's change that. Let's speak life into the moments that matter by using our First Amendment rights to uplift, not just to argue, to speak words that inform rather than inflame, to listen with empathy when others speak their truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Let's remember that the right to speak is also the duty to hear. So here's my challenge to the viewers. Yes, you watching. Speak life into the moments that matter. Start a conversation this week with someone who sees the world differently. Listen, learn, disagree respectfully. And here's your call to action. Don't stay muted. Speak up in your community, in your art, in your workplace, online, and especially in the voting booth. Defend your right to speak, and just as importantly, defend someone else's. Because the First Amendment is more than law. It's a living promise that only survives when we use it wisely, boldly, and together. Until the next episode, I do want to thank DFN Broadcast Studio for the opportunity to develop and bring you this show. I'm Calvin Gibbs, and this has been Born to Speak to You TV. Until the next episode, keep your voice strong, keep your mind open, and remember that your words have power. Use them wisely and keep speaking life into the moments that matter. And we'll see you at the next episode.
Of Brooklyn, where stories grow wild, to the glow of the stage where the dream meets the child. A quiet flame, a hidden spark, drawn to the words that lit up the dark. Curtains rose and so did he, finding power in poetry. One voice, one mic, one sacred truth. Every word he spoke uncaged the youth. He saw the world try to silence the bold, but his soul was wired to break the mold. Now he walks in purpose, pure and true. He was born to speak to you. He's got that rhythm in his truth, that fire in his flow. Speaking life into the moment, watch it grow.